Hi, this is Mike Power, President and CEO of Silver Range Resources, and this is a quick look at our Shamrock property. First, quick word from our lawyers. Shamrock's 45 kilometers east-southeast of Ely, readily accessible off Highway 50. There's a turnoff to the south just before Sacramento Pass. The property's cut by 4x4 roads. At the moment, we have 9 claims covering the project. These are staked on VLM land with no surface impairments. Shamrock is located in the Sacramento mining district. That's just north of the Osceola district, a little more famous, in the Snake Range, bordering Spring Valley. The Osceola district was, I think, the largest placer producer in Nevada. A lot of gold in there. And the Sacramento mining district was noted for gold, silver, copper, and tungsten. The Gilded Age mine, which is one of the 2 major mines on the Shamrock property, was staked in 1874 roughly, and saw intermittent production between 1875 and 1948 when it apparently finally shut down, although there's evidence of perhaps some high grading thereafter. The Woodman mine was staked by Moses Woodman in 1897, and it too saw intermittent production from 1898 through 1948. The Woodman and Gilded Age mines were the principal producers in the district, and they shipped ore to a mill and smelter in Osceola. Here's some production data from the Sacramento district, from Gilded Age and Woodman essentially. And as you can see, there's been some not inconsequential small production from the district, mostly in gold, but also some silver. There was also copper reported, and interestingly, this whole district got a bad rap from the USGS and the US Bureau of Mines because it was inspected around 1915, and the first people in there were looking for tungsten, and there was tungsten, and there was a small tungsten mining operation. So the whole Sacramento district got relabeled as a tungsten district. And then in classic fashion, every subsequent report writer basically copied from the previous one. So if you go and investigate the Sacramento district in the Nevada Bureau of Mines and Geology, it shows up as a tungsten district. But there's very little mention of tungsten in any of the press clippings for the area. This is was noted as a gold and silver district primarily. Here's the regional geology from Crawford's 2007 compilation of the older county geology maps. Shamrock's outlined in red. The property's underlain by Cambrian carbonates to the west, separated by a thrust fault in this mapping from McCoy Group Proterozoic quartzites to the east. It's interesting to note at about 3 kilometers to the southeast of the property, there's Jurassic intrusive rocks, JFI, right here. Now, if you visit the area, you'll see quite right away that there's some problems with the way the geology has been mapped here. For one, most of the rocks dip gently to the or moderately to the east-southeast. And in addition, we've got a thrust fault here that's placing younger over older rocks. There's something wrong there. Well, subsequent mapping has shown that the Shamrock property sits astride a major detachment fault bounding the west side of the Snake Range Metamorphic Core Complex. If we look at what this might look like in cross-section, we find this detachment fault is moving rocks to the west down into Spring Valley, and because of the geometry of this upwelling, the rocks tend to dip to the east. If we erode the rocks in the area of the Shamrock property, we find that rocks both above and below the detachment fault would dip to the east, and the detachment fault dips to the west. Here's the property geology based on some very preliminary mapping. Most of the property is underlain by limestone, these 2 units here, separated by a detachment fault shown here. The footwall rocks consist of a small lozenge of argillite, but mostly it's a quartzite. The detachment fault shows little deflection as it runs up topography here, so it might be moderately dipping at or perhaps a little steeper. The limestone can be subdivided into 2 units if you choose to. The blue-gray limestone is at higher elevations on a hill that's underneath here. It looks like this. At lower elevations and closer to the detachment faults, it's a little more tan in color, and bedding seems a little finer. It may be a separate unit, or it might be some alteration proximal to the detachment fault. The underlying argillite unit, just a small lozenge of phyllite here, looks like this, and the quartzite is fairly massive and pink. These rocks are cut by veins, and these are for the most part restricted to the uppermost blue-gray limestone. The veins are basically follow two orientations. They're either sort of west-south, west-northwest, east-southeast striking, or sort of north-northeast striking. They vary in dip from fairly steeply dipping to actually quite shallow dipping at only about 30 degrees in this stope here. Bedding, on the other hand, dips uniformly to the east-southeast, about 45 degrees in the overlying limestones, and a little shallower, about 28 degrees in the argillite and quartzite. And these dips fit the model I showed you in the previous slide quite well. Let's have a look at the veins and breccias which host the mineralization. So they look like this. They vary in dip from fairly steeply dipping structures here to, as I said, gently to moderately dipping structures. This is in the Woodman vein on the north end of the property. They are up to, say, 1.5 meters wide. That's about as wide as been reported underground. It's a little over 1 meter. There's also breccia. It looks like this here. The matrix is iron carbonate. The class are milled limestone. They appear to be tectonic breccias and not collapsed breccias based on the fact there's no jigsaw texture. Here are the workings we mapped to date from a brief program. Mostly shafts, a few adits. Along the north brow of the hill here, this permits access along the sort of steeply dipping structures via adits. But for the most part, miners found these more steeply dipping structures here and had to put a shaft on them. So they'd glory hole, stick a shaft on them, follow them along. There's reportedly about 600 feet of underground workings along strike here from an old press release, but that remains to be verified. Most of these are barricaded off here by the BLM. You can see bird cages everywhere. However, there's one spot on the property where they left an open stope on the Woodman mine, and you can get in and have a look around. Here's that stope. It strikes roughly south-southeast and dips west-southwest. And at a moderate or shallow angle, you can see here it's only about 30 degrees. Fairly extensive, comes out at lower elevations at 2 different adits, and there's a lot of waste rock from this operation. Here's what the mineralization looks like. It's hosted predominantly in quartz veins, but also in carbonate veins and breccias. The carbonate veins are white calcite veins, but they carry good grades, at least in the southern part of the property. The material is oxidized at surface, very hard to find sulfides. The gold, it correlates with silver, cadmium, lead, copper, zinc, and antimony. There's distinctly elevated zinc and tungsten on the property. So the mineralization is structurally controlled in veins and breccias, got very sharp wall rock contacts. Widths we've seen are to about 1 meter in old workings, and that jives with reports. We've seen newspaper clippings stating they're following 3-foot wide veins underground. Dips are variable, steeply dipping in the central part of the property, but on the north part of the property, there's one occurrence there that dips at about 30 degrees. Let's look at rock sample results, and they're very good. We're looking here primarily at grab samples, and they've returned up to 233 grams per ton in gold. And interestingly, 8 out of 28 samples returned better than 5 grams per ton gold. And as you can see here, there's some very nice high-grade samples. Silver, also very high, up to 1,520 grams per ton. And 6 out of 28 samples returned assays greater than 500 grams per ton silver. And there's coincident copper, traced to 4%. With 13 out of 28 samples returning better than 0.3% copper. So all in all, a very strong sampling profile from grab samples in gold, silver, and copper. So what is this? Well, we think Shamrock is classic CRD or carbonate replacement deposit style mineralization, and we see it being located about here geochemically. That's based on the elevated copper and gold, but rather low zinc numbers. There is lead to a couple of percent, but the zinc numbers don't even reach a 0.5%. So geochemically, we see the mineralization placed about here in your classic CRD model. On the property, we find high-grade gold, silver, and base metal mineralization in an area of about 800 by 300 meters. Let's take a cross-section through the principal workings here across the brow of the hill. What we find are a series of moderate to steeply dipping faults and fractures that are well mineralized at a variety of strikes. In aggregate, they appear to form a fault or fracture network largely confined to the upper limestone. And we think this might be the tip of a larger, well-endowed CRD system. Now, an important thing to keep in mind is that the tips of CRD systems can be very small. There can be very limited surface exposure of systems that actually persist to great depth. Here's an example from Mexico, Naica. We're looking at work here done by Rockstone Research and Peter McGaugh. The outcrop of this very large mineralized system with already 45 million tons of lead, zinc, and silver is only a 75-meter glory hole at the top. Here's Santa Eulalia, even smaller. The top of this system consists of a small pit of about 40 meters long, and yet there's kilometers of underground mineralization. The point I'm trying to make here is that although the surface expression of a CRD deposit might be quite small, they can be quite large at depth, and this requires more exploration and some drilling. So what's next? Well, we need to do a little bit more field work. Particularly, I think we might have missed some structures on the property, and we need to do some structural analysis to get a tight control on what the orientation of the various components of this fault or fracture network is that we believe is hosting the CRD system. After that, we'd like to do a 3D IP survey. We feel that that will be key to defining a drill target and a way of testing what we believe might be a very interesting CRD system. So stay tuned.